So she said, wait a minute, she said, I would advise you to leave Bratislava because it will be so terrible, the terror will be so big. They will go from house to house to search for Jews. I said, but where to? Where will I go? So she said, I'll tell you what. She sent me to a social worker, and she said, I entrusted quite a few Jewish children to her, and she placed them in villages. She said, try, go there. And I went there, and she said, I don't even know the whereabouts of the children that I entrusted to people in the villages. Bombing is constantly a daily occurrence. She said, I don't know where they are, so I cannot recommend you to anybody. And I was ready to leave, and she said, wait a minute. She said, I have a client, she's in a wheelchair, and she lives on the Moravian border in what was it, Skalica. And so I figured, now, where do I go first? I have to go and get a permit for the train. So I remembered that the Jewish owners of the company had somebody in the passport department. Matter of fact, he was the head of the passport department. And I said, I'm going there to find out what I can do. When I came in, he was so astounded because no Jew was anymore existing except in hiding. And he said, I would advise you to go to take the train. I said, but how do I get a permit? He said, go without a permit. He said, my wife went also without a permit. But it was easy for him to say, if they find her, he's the head of the passport department. When they find me, I go to Auschwitz. So I didn't say anything, and I just decided to take the train without. So I asked, when I came back to the waiter, he was gone, but she was home, and she said, I'm going with you. She offered to come with me on the train. She had such compassion, you know. So we got to 123, and we went to the train. And again, I was in one coupe, and she was in another because it was full with German soldiers. And I listened to their conversation, you know. They were, it was already November, late November, and Hitler had not spoken like he used to bark, you know, every month. So they said, well, now we have the missiles, the V2, and he said, we can get even to America. Nothing can stop us. So I listened to their conversation, and in came the local militia, and they asked me for my papers. And I said, oh my gosh, I left my muff in the other coupe. And he let me go, and I went there where she was with the child. He never came back. It was a miracle. So when we got out of the train, we had an address, so we walked towards it, and it started to get dark. By the time we got there, it was already semi-dark. And it was a peasant house with a thatched house, a thatched roof, you know, and one room was the big hearth, you call it, yeah. And the old peasant was sitting there, and there was the room between the room where this woman was sitting really on a wheelchair. And I walked over to her, and I gave her regards from this woman. She was very, very pleased. And then when I told her, I want to be with her, she said, no, she cannot do it. She cannot do it. So we asked her to please let us sleep over for one night, because we cannot possibly go back. So she agreed to that, but she did not want the carriage to be inside in the room. She said the carriage has to be in the hall. It was cold. It was unheated. And so I saw, it's better than to be outside in the snow. It was already snowing in November. So I and the waiter's wife, we slept on the bare floor. And the child had to be in the carriage in the cold room. But luckily, I had a sleeping bed, a fur one, in the carriage. But still, it was not enough. I bundled up his hands, I bundled up his face and everything. But he was crying. And I knew, this is it, she will not let me be there. So I had to take him out and change him, and their sleep was gone. In the morning she said, no, she cannot do it. So I started to bribe her. I said, look, I will pay you so and so much for a week. And maybe in a week I will leave. It's just until the whole thing blows over. So she said, okay. Meanwhile, she went home, the waiter's wife, and I remained. So there was, between her father, who was a Catholic, and she turned evangelist, that he did not forgive her. So it was not a good relationship. And I talked to him, and he took me to the cabinet where he had his clothes. And he wore this peasant kind of clothes, the wool stuff, a light color. He said, this is prepared for my coffin, he said, when I die. And he sat at the window, and I looked out at the window, and there was a hand going to the other neighbor, to cross the line to the neighbor's property. And he was worried that maybe the chicken will lay an egg there and he won't retrieve it. I thought I should have this worry. Anyway, there was a question, what will the child drink? There was no pasteurized milk, and I did not have enough. I pumped and hardly anything came out from my breast. So she lived with a young woman, a sister-in-law, and she was nice. She would sing to the baby, hold him, and she would fetch the water. The water had to be fetched from the street, like a block away, to carry buckets of water. And that was it. Once a day, they brought 2 buckets. So I warmed up the water to bathe the baby. And in the same water, I washed myself the hair. And the same water had to wash the diapers. And then they had to take the water and dump it outside. So it was quite a chore for that young woman. And her husband was with the partisans, in other words, illegal. But they hardly cooked. I lost so much weight in the 4 weeks or 3 weeks that I was there, that everything was, and the child